how do you coach companies to change their mindset? Because most don't have that sort of solve these little problems will get you much more. It's a lost leader.
It's tricky because what you're articulating also comes down to short-term versus long-term, right? In the short term, you flying those folks out probably doesn't pencil out on any kind of financial analysis if you're looking at a 90-day or even a little bit longer horizon, right? But when you look at the longer term, then absolutely that can turn into something that is fantastic. But I think that I'm guessing, Lee, that one of the other things that happens is you probably make sure that to point out and educate the customer on what it is that you're doing when you fly that team out, why it's so important to you. And that's where I think people break down in systems, right? So, the classic thing that I saw, and I saw this happen to one of my customers, is it's this idea that ultimately is called Goodhart's Law. And Goodhart's Law says that when you measure somebody based on their input only, because you know that that input connects to some result, you break the result. And I'll give you a great example. I had this company. It was a Japanese company that had a U.S. presence, and they only brought over CEOs from Japan, and they would ship them out. And so, but unfortunately, they don't know the local markets. So this poor guy comes in, and he's the new CEO of this company, and I won't mention their name. And he says, "I've noticed that our best salespeople send one quote every day, and so I have decided that all of our salespeople will send one quote every day. That is the new rule. Like, all salespeople send one quote a day, and we'll all get the same result." Well, you can guess what happened. Every day, every salesperson, no matter what, would you have to send out one quote a day. So sometimes they'd call up their uncle and be like, "Hey, uncle, I need to have one quote today. I'm just going to send you one. Like, you don't have to sign for anything, but just, I need to send it to you. So just don't freak out when it gets there." Right. And, people would they started doing random quotes. Well, now it's worthless. Right. And now it doesn't, you violated what was happening because the good salespeople had enough of the other stuff they were doing to warrant one quote per day. So forcing an input doesn't work. So in your case, my biggest devil's advocate or the thing you'd have to figure out is, how do we make sure that when we have a disgruntled customer and we're going to send out the A team to go, bolt the piece onto the helicopter, how do we make sure that we're not just instituting that as an input without, also explaining how does that fit into an overall customer experience that makes that customer feel that value so that they do give you all their business? How do we make sure the salesperson goes out and says, "Hey, we realize we screwed up. We're really sorry. We overdid this because that's how much we care about you." Because if you're missing a few of those pieces, if you just send the team out in the dark and they bolt the thing on and they go home and they're like, "Well, I'm going to go to the bar now. I did my job," then you miss the whole big experience that was coming from that. Right. And so then that's when an MBA comes in, looks at the business and goes, "Cut doing that. Let's stop that. That's not working." Right. And so these answers to these problems are never that simple. They have to be done right. But when you think about the whole customer experience that goes along with it, and you really, put in everything to make the customer feel it, that matters. And to me, the gold standard, the last thing I'll say on this topic is the human brain is an emotional decision maker. It makes decisions based on emotion, not logic. I hate that. I hate that about my own brain. I wish it was logical all the time. I'd be a much better chess player if I was. But the thing is that it doesn't. So customer experience is about making customers feel emotions at the moments that matter. And when you can do that, then you create that association so that you can win when the opportunity comes there. Because the reality is, companies who love you will find ways to do business with you. Companies that don't love you will find ways to minimize how much business they do with you, no matter even if you have the best products. And so customer experience is really about that. It's about the emotional side of the delivery far more than it is about, the actual concrete delivery. Got it. Obviously not saying that you don't have that, but that's really where it comes into.
I do think people have way more, call it endurance, than they give themselves credit for. And in part, it's because we don't really get to push ourselves to the limit very often in modern day society. So by creating things like deciding to run an ultramarathon, that is one good way to create that, let's see how far and how hard I can go, and let's get closer to my actual limits. There's a story about a coach watching a marathoner, though, and the marathoner crossed the line, and it was an excellent time. And the coach turned around and said to his friend, he could have gone faster. And the guy's like, what do you mean? He had the best time ever. And he said, no, he's still alive, right? In theory, if, let's say, the guy had taken a whole bunch of methamphetamine in the last 1 mile of the race, there's a chance that he could have gone an extra, cut another 30 seconds off of his time or a minute. Now, he might also drop dead as soon as he crossed the finish line. So when it comes to physical endeavors in dangerous area, you can balance two things. One, you can go probably harder and longer and further than you think you're capable of. On the other hand, is a question of should you, because if you go to 100% if you're operating at 99% of your limit, and then something goes wrong, I'm going to go at 99% of my limit because I know that if I get there, then I can rest. But then all of a sudden something goes wrong, you went the wrong way, you've got to go further than you think you did. And now you don't have anything left in the tank. That can be really quite dangerous. So I think we have to distinguish between going 100% mentally and 100% physically. And when you're operating that close, it'd be like saying, I'm in an investing example, I'm going to take every single penny I own. I'm going to empty out my piggy bank that I've been keeping since I was 2 years old, because there's an extra $30 in there. I'm going to take every credit card, every line of credit. I'm going to remortgage my house. I'm going to sell my car, sell all my clothes. I'm just going to make this one bet. Like now, if something goes wrong, you're screwed. So you probably can go further than you think you can. And it's good to push that. At the same time, it's a difficult dance because at the same time, you have to leave something in the tank for when something goes wrong. So I think things like an ultra marathon is a great idea or even a 10K, because say you decide to run your first 10K race, and let's say something goes terribly wrong. I don't know. You totally bonk and you collapse at the side of the road. The odds that you die are fairly low. Somebody's going to see your body, they're going to call the ambulance, and you're probably not going to die. So I would recommend that people who want to push their limits do something like a 10K race, not a 10K solo swim from one Hawaiian island to the other. Because if something goes wrong out there, you're just going to disappear in the Pacific Ocean and never be seen again. So that's always the dichotomy. You can go further, and the place to push yourself further, honestly, like one relatively safe place is in the gym. If you want to run treadmill sprints, I mean, you can end up, if it goes very poorly, you can end up throwing up. You could maybe fall off the treadmill. Likelihood of dying, fairly low. Likelihood of a catastrophic injury, fairly low.
I was going to say, I'm super interested in the sort of mental, emotional connection to those limits. Because I've had situations where, man, I can't do much more. I feel like I'm right on the edge, and I'll get a piece of news. All of a sudden, my whole body dies again. Yeah. So I think there's a lot there. Like, here's the limit. Let's say you can even tap into the limit, but something can happen emotionally that removes that barrier and goes to the next level. Have you experienced that?
For sure. And there's all kinds of tricks that you can play with your mind, right? I'm a big advocate of lying to yourself. And because once you get momentum going, momentum tends to sustain itself. So in a martial arts context, when I'm really tired, what I used to tell myself was, dude, you don't need to train. You just need to bring your gi and go to class. And if you walk through that door and you get changed and you still don't feel like training, it's okay to go home. 90% of the time, maybe even 95% of the time, when I made that deal with myself, I'd end up walking through the doors and then get that sudden burst of energy. So ironically, by giving myself permission to bail out, it increased the total number of times I ended up training. Similarly, on that expedition, that particular one, because that was a really hard one, I would lie to myself all the time. Look, you just need to get out of bed. You just need to put in 10 kilometers. You just need to go for a couple of hours. Let's just see what's around that corner there. And 95% of the time, that 10 kilometers turned into 20, turned into 30, turned into going for the whole day. Because even though you didn't feel that you had it in you, once you had some momentum going, you were able to continue. Then other tricks I would use to keep that momentum going would be things like trying to dissociate mind from body. Like just let your body do its thing. So I used to have a purist approach to not using any kind of headphones or earbuds or music or podcasts or anything in the bush. Now I think of them as kind of a performance supplement. I think of them as I could take a tab of caffeine, and I do carry caffeine tablets. I don't use them often, but if I absolutely had to keep going and I'm dead, that would be one trick. I might pop a caffeine tablet. Another thing I might do is pop some earbuds in just to give my mind something else to think about. If it's thinking about the end of the Roman Republic, if it's trying to follow what the Gracchus brothers were doing, then it's less time spent focusing on your own suffering, and your body knows what to do. Another trick is breaking it into smaller chunks, right? I don't need to paddle for the next 5 hours. I just need to take another 100 strokes. So then you're counting strokes, 1, 2, 3, 4, up to 100, and then you start again. So that does two things. It gives your mind something to think about, counting numbers, and it also makes the task seem not as overwhelming. College students do this. Well, I'm assuming college students still write their own essays, which is a big question. I mean, what percentage of college essays are written with AI nowadays? I'm going to say it's very high, but I just need to produce another 500 words. Let's just focus on the next paragraph that I need to write. I'm video editing something for my martial arts channel. I don't need to launch this whole thing tonight. Let me just get to this point. Oh, I'll go a little bit further. Let me go to that point. Oh, I'll go a little bit. Might as well get it all done. By breaking the task up, it makes it seem much more palatable. And by lying to yourself continuously just to get started is also a useful trick. I don't know if that's using the dark side of the force, but it's worked for me.
It sounds like a great hack. And just a quick side note, love the videos on your website for jiu-jitsu training. And the funniest one I saw, because your sense of humor is amazing, it's the 2 worst self-defense techniques. It's like guaranteed to break your forearm to give the other side and stab yourself in the foot by dropping your knife on it, right? Anyway, hilarious. Thank you.
And it just goes to show you what happens, what crazy places you can go to if you're living in theory land, right? It'd be totally possible to design, if you only lived in theory, you can come up with some crazy theories that are totally sound, right? There's a saying in physics that in theory, reality and theory are the same thing. In practice, they're not. Or in reality, they're not, right? You can create some pretty amazing dream castles, and you actually have to try and knock down your own hypotheses. And I guess that's the basis of science, right? Asking yourself, how could this thing that I've been working on, this theory about, I don't know, how maple trees, the percentage of energy that a maple tree devotes to making maple sap. I'm picking some dumb idea. And you have this elaborate theory worked out, and how do you disprove that? I have a theory that the way to cure energy levels is by supplementing with coenzyme Q10. Well, how do we test that? How do we test that in a real person? And we would start in a petri dish, then we move to a rat, then we move to humans, and there's a process, and along the way we're trying to murder our darlings. We're trying to disprove the things that we think. Certainly in the bush, I'm trying to disprove the things that I think all the time, because navigation is really, really important, and especially in some kinds of terrain. If you're following a trail or you're paddling down a winding river, it's pretty simple. You should still probably know where you are, but it's harder to get lost. If you're in complex terrain, especially terrain that has either changed or is quite changeable depending on, say, water levels, the map that's in your GPS, the map that you have on paper, may not be representative of what you're actually seeing on the ground. That was so 4 feet of water ago. That island that you're trying to get to doesn't exist at this water level, or has been washed away by the spring freshet long, long ago. So you're constantly going, I think this is where I am. I think this is the situation. How do I prove it? And then more importantly, how do I disprove it? So it's a continuous process of self-doubt, essentially, like it's inculcating self-doubt to prevent you from being very, very certain about something that's completely wrong.
So here's the thing that I would tell leaders, keeping it simple, right? I'm the queen of simplicity. So first thing is, I want your leaders and your listeners today, right? You're done listening to this podcast, go find 5 people individually in your company and ask them the following 3 questions. What business are we in? How does the business make money? How does what you do help the business win? Just ask those 3 questions. If you find 5 people and individually ask those 3 questions, most likely you're going to get a whole lot of different answers. And that's not a bad thing, leaders. That just shows you where your gap is. And now you have to fill that gap, because misalignment is really, really, really expensive. So you must get the team all walking in the same beat, to the same drummer, to the same song. We're going to the same destination, right? And so by asking those 3 questions, at least it gives you an understanding as to where's your starting line. The second thing, one of the things I used to do a lot is do walk-a-miles in my company. So anytime I was running a company or even running a department, is have it where everybody in the company, I wanted to make sure that the left hand knew what the right hand was doing. And so what that meant for me was that everybody had to do a walk-a-mile. So you and I come from aviation. I'll use pilots as an example. Whenever for most people that may not realize, whenever you're running an aviation company, your largest workforce is usually the pilot or the crew force. And so for me, what I would start to have the team do is whenever the pilots were in town for training, now they're getting trained all the time on aircraft stuff, but I told the chief pilots and all that, is like, I want the pilots in the office, in the headquarters, and I want them to do walk-a-miles with all the other departments. So yes, I definitely, for safety reasons, want you to be able to, fly the aircraft and get all your recurring training and all the stuff that's needed there. But I also, equally as important, you're an important part of this organization. I want you to understand how this organization runs, so that, what does it take in order for us to get a customer to be able to get on a plane, for you then to be able to fly them. There's a gazillion steps up into that point, right? And so I want you to have a good understanding of that. And so by doing that, where, maybe pilots will put some headphones on and listen to what customer service is dealing with, or how they're booking a trip, or all that stuff. So now all of a sudden, if the pilot's ready to go and they don't have their paperwork, instead of getting mad, like, oh, what's headquarters doing? They're like, oh, wait, you know what? I know all the stuff that they're doing. Let me call and see if I can help out. Maybe they're slowed down somewhere. How can I pitch in, so on and so forth. That's just an example of pilot stuff. Let's use sales, because a lot of times, I before I started running companies, I came up as a head of sales. And, when you ask the sales team, hey, how does the company make money? They're usually like, well, if I hit my quota. It's like, well, okay, that's true. That's one part of it, but that's not everything, right? And so I refused to have an ignorant sales force. I want the sales team to understand, how does this business make money? And so because it's beyond you just hitting your quota, though that's important. But that if your mindset is, I just need to hit my quota, then I've created a salesperson. But if your mindset is, no, this is how the business operates. This is where we focus. This is what our EBITDA is. Like, this is the stuff that's keeping my executives up at night. You start understanding that. Now I've created a business executive, which is very different than a salesperson, right? And so, the one and the two can be the same. And so anyways, it just takes an effort for us leaders. At the beginning, that may seem like a lot, like, oh, I'm going to have everybody do a welcome out. Absolutely. Because once that happens, I promise you, it will increase your team morale. It will increase the teamwork because now they're working like a functional team. And then also it will allow your people to level up because they have a better business acumen understanding, not just the one job that they do for the one department that they're in. Very different organization.
Yeah, and leaders that don't want to do that because it's going to take time or whatever, how much is it costing them not doing it? So you may be surprised. And with the time I sold Able Aerospace to Textron, we had just over 500 team members. And every single month when we closed the books, every employee in the company had full access to the balance sheet and income statements.
Oh my God, that's huge. Say that again for the people in the back, Lee. That is not normal. That's amazing.
If they didn't understand debits and credits, we would give them what we called a plain English version of the detailed trial balance. So they can say, this is my department. I use this many rolls of tape. It costs this much, this many of these different resources.
Nice.
With everybody being able to see that, the reason it's so important, I think, that you're completely transparent with all of it is you've fully exposed the targets and you moved them closer to the target so they can actually hit it. And when you have hundreds of employees coming up with savings every single month because they can see this, what does that do for your bottom line? What does it do for improving customer experience, internal and external? And for me, the goal here is how do we, and this is one of my biggest takeaways from your book, how do we get everybody acting like the CEO of their own role and they're just running towards it? So one of my biggest takeaways from your book is that when we have a team and we're leading this, it's not ideal to make it transactional. I pay you, you do this. We're all together on this developmental journey, working together. They're on the bus. We're developing them. If we decide we don't want to develop them, because that means they shouldn't be on the bus, and then let's help them find another job with dignity. But it's looking at it as this team that we're working together. We all have our job, and as leaders, we're creating this environment from which everybody creates value. And that's a big takeaway from the book for me. And I want to say at least 80% of leaders completely miss that. What's your experience?
Oh man, thank you. I'm glad that was your takeaway because that was really a big message I was trying to convey is because if you can create that type of environment, because you've sold companies and your folks have, gotten a huge benefit because of they were part of the team and they helped build it and help make it sellable, right? To your point. And so if leaders, you're right, if leaders who say like, I just don't have the time, then I really question if you should be a leader because leadership is a big responsibility. And I personally, I'm a woman of faith. And so I always say that I feel like one day I'm going to stand in front of my creator and really have to be ready to defend or explain or whatever what I did with his most prized possession, which is people. Right. And so you've given me the ability to have, leadership over these folks. And so I don't take it lightly at all. And I know that part of my job is to make sure that I'm pulling out their gifts and talents so I can develop them to the next level while they're in my jurisdiction. And we move them, on to whatever their next calling is. And so that's how I see it. And so I don't take the whole leadership thing lightly.
Talk about order and going after, because I know you have 5-month intense engagement, something like that when you work with a client to get, and you've said it well, and I've listened to so many of your interviews. It's not about fixing an organization. It's really just identifying and moving in a direction of creating a lot more value, through culture. But how do you think about order? And do you actually touch on those things when you come in, getting the foundation right, et cetera?
Oh yeah, absolutely. In fact, we'll spend a few hours with CEOs before we even engage in a proposal. So we're building a relationship built on that foundation right out of the gate as we're talking to prospects. And so that by the time we even get to a proposal, we've got a really solid relationship. And then we go to the next day, which is to engage the executive team. And we'll do a 4-hour orientation. And the orientation is just that. It's meant to orient all of us towards what is the value of going through this experience? Why are we going to do this 5 months together? Because if we're not all clear about it, then let's stop right here. There's no point in continuing. And too many times CEOs will kind of force this this stuff down their people's throat, and then they wonder why it doesn't work. Well, because you didn't slow down at the beginning and create a sense of a North Star. What are we trying to accomplish together? And it's okay. A lot of times, frankly, people are very skeptical, and we welcome that. We welcome the skepticism because we know there's a lot of stuff out there that doesn't work, that's not terribly effective. Unfortunately, a lot of it falls into that leadership training bucket. And so we try to stay clear of leadership training. We try to create leadership experiences. We try to help foment really productive conversations and tremendous amount of insight. So when we do our 2.5-day retreat, which is the next step in the process, that 2.5 days is quite intense, frankly. We'll start at 8 a.m. Sometimes we don't finish until 7 or 8 p.m. on the first day. So it's quite intense, but a lot of it's not us training people because we don't need more training. There's plenty of books. You've been to plenty of leadership trainings in the past. Our job is really to help the team have conversations that they've never had before, at depths they've never had before, so that we can live this, because that's really the ultimate difference maker, is that you can't train people on these concepts. You have to help people be the concepts. They have to live that way. And if you don't live in a different way going forward, then it's a waste of time. The culture is not going to change unless you're being a new version of yourself.
So give a couple of examples of, after these retreats, how leaders go back and move the needle. The way I think about it, just essentially operationalizing the things that drive a culture that creates more and more value. And I always think, Tom, I want to connect culture to creating value. And everything we do is really practical, is measurable. And I think it's measurable in all three buckets: material, emotional, and spiritual.
Yeah, well, let me just continue with that integrity theme, since we've already brought it up. There's lots of other stories, but I think this will resonate with your audience. If I were to ask your audience, how many of you are really busy? I'm sure many hands would be raised, right? And how many CEOs are feeling especially busy? Again, many people resonate with that. Well, how many of you CEOs think it's okay to show up late to a meeting, or think it's okay to not do what you said you're going to do as a follow-up to me because you're really busy and you're the CEO? Well, that's great, but guess what? That's sending a signal to the rest of the organization. And we had one CEO who literally he said it was like a spiritual experience almost, where he woke up from a dream in the middle of the night at the first night of our retreat. And he realized that he was doing exactly that. He was frustrated that the organization wasn't producing results. They weren't, as a collective 1,000 employees, they weren't delivering the results that he has been working really hard at for years to try to get. And he realized that one of the biggest reasons was because he wasn't doing what he said he would do, whether it was showing up for a meeting on time or following through like he said he would. I'll get that to you next Monday. And then he wouldn't. And he said he went to work on that one thing over the several weeks after the retreat. And he said, I'm seeing spontaneous acts of accountability everywhere. Just that one change for him as the leader, as the CEO, completely transformed that culture.
Yeah, it makes so much sense. We need to lead by example and actually do these things. And if integrity or high-performing team members do what they said they would as a behavior or something that we're all living as part of our cultural alignment tools, a lot of leaders don't think it applies to them. Everybody else should do this, but I shouldn't do it. So I think that gets to one of the things I was talking about earlier, where we can apply these 3 or 4 things. Might work for you, Tom, might not work for me. It all depends on how we apply it. But I think the first rule has to be live it by example. Other people will see it, right? So that's a pretty powerful part of your work.
It's most of the work, frankly, and it's not new. This is not a new concept, right? We've all heard this before, but you said it, you nailed it, right? That everyone thinks it's about the other people, not me. And so if you're a CEO that wants to take your team and take your organization to the next level, but you're not willing to do the hard work yourself, then don't waste your time, because you will just frustrate your people. It starts with you.
Playing it safe is perhaps the most risky thing you can do in business. I 100% agree. So just talk about that a little bit.
I mean, to some degree, that's just another framing for what we've been talking about, which is like, can't we just have a normal day? Can't we just kind of glide a little bit and take it easy. That is complacency manifested right there. And taking calculated risks is how you actually, like, that's what an entrepreneur does. That is what an innovator does, is they take calculated risks. That is the opposite of playing it safe. When you play it safe, you just do incremental, more of the same, which is good, but it is not sufficient. You have to have a portfolio of calculated moves that you're thinking about, and always be testing in a lightweight way. And then that both helps keep humility, that keeps your eye on the market and the future market, and you'll spot an opportunity. It's like, well, we need to do more on this specific concept of our portfolio and move it forward in, again, a risk calculated manner, leading with experimentation, right? High ambition, high risk moves are the way that you change the future of a company. Those things, that's what a big bet is. That is what a transformation is. The mistakes are bountiful, but the two essential ones are, I'm thinking of a fence line here, right? And you've got an error on one side of the fence and an error on the other side of the fence. The error on one side of the fence is that we think we have a great idea and we just go for it, and everything, right? That's an error, because those things don't work out that way. You can't predict these high risk, high dependency, high ambition strategies. The other is, hey, we just play it safe, right? We don't have any bold moves in our portfolio. Well, that leads to a very stale and at-risk business. The fine line of fence that we need to create is a set of high ambition, high risk potential moves we could do, figure out how we test those things out and move them from high ambition, high risk to high ambition, low risk. That's the job of experimentation to do. That's what we outline in Big Bet Leadership is the actual habits and tactics to do those moves.
Yeah. I love that. So far in my 45-year overnight success story, I've kind of distilled it down to my definition of strategy is approaches to increasing the value of the business. And there will be strategic initiatives. And when I look at strategy decks from companies, when I go into work with them to help them execute, usually the bigger companies, there could be over 100 strategic initiatives. And I usually find there's no more than about 15 or 20 that will really move the needle. The rest of them I put in this category called please do your job. But I like having a list of things that'll move the needle, and I want a culture of continuous improvement innovation going on. I want both happening.
You want both. Yeah.
And then what you're talking about here, so I built some things assuming they would come. I think I know for sure my single biggest miss, it cost me, I wrote off $27 million personally. Okay, that didn't work, but turned the page and went on. Packaging and testing inexpensively, very quickly to de-risk anything that we're doing as a business that's going to be kind of a big bet. Walk through what you've learned there. I've made one really big mistake, a few smaller mistakes, but wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Richard Rumont wrote a very good book called Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. And what good strategy, bad strategy frames or postulates is that good strategy actually identifies a core problem or challenge in the business, and then a philosophy and set of tactics to address that problem. That is what good strategy is. Bad strategy is just the opposite, which is kind of vague goals and vague hope and aspirations and everything, right? So we took that fundamental framework of what good strategy is, and we helped manifest it and add in a layer of experimentation relative to that. So what we believe a business has to do is to, at the right level, identify the core problem that your customer has or your operator has or your cost model has, postulate a hypothesis, like a tangible hypothesis of what that future state is so that you can taste it, you can feel it, like you can really understand it, and then identify, well, what are the truly critical things that have to be true, but that are high risk relative to that future state. And if you take that level of design and identifying those, then you can actually prioritize and define a set of short, very specific experiments or tests or information seeking exercises to actually understand that factor better. But what happens in most companies is we have a vague understanding of the problem that we're solving. We have a vague, an even vaguer understanding of what the future state is. We don't try to identify what the real risks are. We think of the risk as really an execution risk primarily, right? And that is a risk, but that is extremely manageable. What is unmanageable is, will the market respond in the way that I want? Will engineering be able to solve this cost model problem? Will we be able to solve for the churn rate that is an inherent part of this business? If you get to that level of specification, you can bring those forward and you can typically figure out a way to experiment or test or learn much more about that factor to inform your strategy before you go forward with it.
Can you share a couple of stories about impact that's coming out of R360?
Look, we have a gentleman that has 5 daughters, and one of them had autism. So he's not a doctor, but he's an entrepreneur, entrepreneurial grit. So in trying to solve that, he figured out certain myths and things and was able to figure out treatments given early that don't involve medical and chemicals, which has had a huge effect. So now they're in 17 different states. He became Entrepreneur of the Year last year nationwide. We have 6 of them in R360, believe it or not, going back 15, 20 years. And so the effect that he's, let's say it would take 2 years to get somebody in and 3 months to get evaluated. He can evaluate somebody within 2 weeks and have them in a program within 30 days. And it's a huge problem in the US. That's one. Another one, based in Florida, was giving money to Israel. And they have now the only blood bank that is actually underground. And they became the major proponent and donor behind that. Another one had cochlear ear implants and went through very difficult situation losing their hearing. So they donated and started a program at the University of Miami, a big gift. And there's 2,000 children now that can hear and have cochlear implants. One of those non-high school graduates that went on to become a billionaire made their money in low-income housing and had experience with, when you're in foster care and you turn 18, they kick you out. And a lot of those kids go into, child sex trafficking, drugs. And one of the problems, at least in South Florida, is there's there's no housing for 3,000 kids. So he's using his chops in low-income housing to build housing that he owns, and then he'll get an NGO to bring 4 or 5 kids into those homes. But they have to be either going to college or full-time employment. So everybody has a different passion. We have a younger couple. She was going to be a missionary, but hates raising money. So she started a business to fund trying to stop human trafficking and violence against women. And her husband is a 20-year Green Beret sniper. And he has a nonprofit that brings 25 veterans, 5 cohorts a year. All of them have tried to commit suicide, and they repurpose them to, they're in Jamaica right now, big Cat 5 hurricane. 3 weeks ago, they were in the Philippines. So they take these former SEALs and Delta and Rangers, and they repurpose them to go save people. And then she and him rescued about 8,000 kids in the Ukraine that would have fallen into, when there's a war like Ukraine, the first people to move in are the child traffickers. So, it's stories and stories. What we're trying to do now is collect what everybody is doing, their impact. We just brought in a member, a woman who's just a firecracker, probably the most philanthropic person in all of South Florida. So, learning from them as to what they do, how they do it, how do you get involved in so many things to actually have an impact? How do you make sure that your dollars, or if you're on a board, that the organization is doing the right things? How do you affect culture with big organizations, right? So those are a lot of the things. One of our members is very involved in junior achievement. I was involved in the national level. I have 3 girls, so I went on to the national board of the Girl Scouts. 30 people on the board, only 2 men. I've never been in that type of board. Most people don't realize they're the 4th largest cookie company in the U.S. They're $1 billion nonprofit because they make money selling cookies, and they train 2 million girls, but their membership was going down, 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 down. And because I was on the board, I said, let me work with the CEO and the team to turn that around. And we're able to do it in 3 years by bringing in really amazing resources to identify the problem. How do we turn that around? What do we do? And the Girl Scouts has over 100 cities or places they serve, and it's like a fiefdom where those presidents have a lot of power. And it's a decentralized system where the CEO, to get anything done, has to use leadership and influence. And because those presidents have quite a bit of power, and a lot of them have been there 20 years. So those are fun things that I like to work on, complex system change.
A lot of folks will look at somebody else's situation and say, man, I really wish I had that. That must be so much easier, so much more fun, doing that particular thing. And for me, the difference is you can make it where you're at. And if you went over there and did that thing, if you started a business around that, you would probably be in the same place, bored and not interested. It's how you show up. And so I also feel like there's a lot of companies that are looking for this magic pill, and we're just going to do this and set it and forget it. But it has to be in the DNA of the business to make it happen. It's not this set it and forget it thing. How did you get? Obviously, this was a huge team effort at Harley, but how did you get them to change the DNA of the business? How did the team, make that happen? And what did you learn in that transition?
The core piece of learning, Lee, was that 100% of this, of repositioning a business, of rekindling a culture, of being more human, resides in the top person or the top people. Again, because not only does the executive team or the CEO set the tone for the business, but they are the people that are being emulated. So their tone, their behavior is what the rest of the organization, one way or another, is modeling. So nothing moves forward, especially if you're trying to change or drive some evolution within a business, without very active participation and involvement of the CEO. And what we found at Harley, I'll tell you I'll try to tell a quick story here. When we first began as a company allowing people to take a test ride on one of our motorcycles, and there was no such thing as a test ride of a new motorcycle in the motorcycle industry anywhere, because everyone was afraid of liability. You take a different look at liability when you're broke. That's the sue us, we ain't got nothing school of risk management. We stopped marketing. We stopped promoting. We stopped advertising. We barely had the money to do it anyway. And instead put new Harleys on semis and took them out to like blue collar centers in America. Picture your Detroits, Clevelands, and let anybody that wanted to take one out for a 15-mile ride do it. And they did. And what we began noticing was that a lot of people who were showing up were what I call the disenfranchised, the people who were the Harley loyalists, the people who had the tattoos. A lot of them were Vietnam, Korean War, even World War II era vets who this was their first opportunity to stand toe to toe with people from the factory in the presence of the products and let us know what a lousy job we'd been doing. How'd you screw this up? Well, I counted on you. I've supported you for years. You don't race anymore. The warranty stuff is horrible. And what would happen is we would bring this feedback back and present it to the executive team. And what we saw was that the blows would hit the body but bounce off. And after like the second or third week of this, I started connecting some dots to say, when you're hearing someone else's complaint secondhand, it doesn't affect you. It's like, sucks for them. We need to work on that. The dots that connect, you guys have to be the ones that are out hearing this. If we're going to affect any change here in the business, the people who have the most impact or the most opportunity to change things and make things better are the people sitting in this room right here, right now. So you need to go out, and we're going to bring out the head of manufacturing, union shop stewards, head of just anybody. We're going to put the people most responsible for the business in front of customers. And two things happened. One was riders are making suggestions. Hey, I'd like that bike if the handlebars were higher or lower. And here's the, guys from manufacturing go, geez, that's punch 10 keys on a CNC machine and we can bend them pretty much any way you want. So we're getting some input here and learning that if we ask people for suggestions on how we should do things, they actually tell us. Maybe there's something to that, wink, wink. And the other half was they were getting bitched at. You're responsible for manufacturing. Well, let me show you the lousy paint job on my bike over here. Come and take a look at this. I saved my whole life to buy this. And look, and the warranty won't support it. And I'm really unhappy. And now they're taking it personally. Now we're coming back into Milwaukee. What do you think? And 100% of them, we have to do this every week. We need to get everybody in this organization out in front of customers. One, to ask for their input on what they like to see us do better. But secondly, to put these fires out. They think we don't care. Then I said, that's the magic bullet right there. They thought we were invisible. We're making ourselves visible. The crowds are getting bigger every week. More people are coming out to do these rides. So word's obviously spreading that we're trying to do something that one way or another is going to benefit them. That's a hell of a lot better than putting a 5% discount or 10% discount on bikes to try to sell them when they're not coming to look at them anyway. At that point, we had what I call executive buy-in. Like, we need to be more visible and more human. Now we need to begin ingraining this in the organization, and very, very challenging at first. And this is the CEO, a dear friend of mine. We would have hours-long discussions as we were flying all over the planet about why certain pockets of the business are embracing this notion of being more human, being more aligned with the business, being more vocal, encouraging input from other people. And what we found was, a lot of the old guard within the company said, well, we've always done it this way. And I know you've heard that probably a million times, and you're like, well, this is how we do it here. And what does that have to do with me? We're doing wiring harnesses over here. Who cares about what we think? So basically, when the CEO began to decree, hey, look, we're going to change the behavior of this business. We're going to change who we are in the eyes and the hearts and the minds of the people that we serve. You're either on board with this 100% or you're not. And we will see you immediately if you're not, because we'll be able to spot those who are working toward creating way more memorable experiences for customers in way more memorable engagements than we're doing it now, and for each other. And if you're not doing that, well, we're going to have a sit down. And the buy-in began to increase almost exponentially. Oh, shit, this isn't the desired behavior here. This is the expected behavior here. I have to do this. And I see everybody else doing it, so therefore I have to be doing it. Even if I don't want to at first, I have to do it. And people bought it. And if this was me getting in front of department heads saying, you have to do this, it wouldn't have anywhere near the strength that it has of when the CEO is standing there with his arms folded saying,
And I love the example in the book. If a team member asks you, how are you doing? What they're really asking is, am I going to be okay in the organization with the way things are at? And I found the numbers incredibly high from a percentage standpoint. So I actually wrote them down out of the book. When you do a survey and you had a few questions on there, I love to tell people that I work at WD-40 company, 98%. Incredible. I am excited about WD-40 company's future direction, 94%. I know what results are expected of me, 96%. In my experience, and I worked with hundreds of companies, it's less than 30%. They're really clear. And I respect my coach. So that was 97%. Just incredible. So you must have been super intentional about how you operationalized things around that, especially expectations.
Yeah. An earlier book that I wrote with my mentor, Dr. Ken Blanchard, the 1 Minute Manager, was called Helping People Win at Work. And the whole basis was, we're not here to mark your paper. We're here to help you get an A. So our philosophy was, are we clear about what an A looks like? So we would intentionally, at the beginning of the year, sit with those we had the privilege to lead as their coach. And we would agree what an A looks like. If it walked in the door today, what would it look like? And then my role as the coach was to help you get that A. So we didn't wait till the end of the year to have that conversation. We'd have ongoing conversations. Lee, where do you think you are? What's getting in your way? What roadblocks you're encountering? What do you need? What training do you need? Now, that's why 97% of people respected their coach. Because when we asked them why, they said, the coach is here to help me win. Now, remember, their coach, in other terms, is their manager or their boss. Most people leave organizations because they hate their boss or they don't respect their boss. The 97% of our people, as you quoted, respected the coach because the coach was there to help them step into the best version of themselves.
Yeah, incredible. Of the 8 companies I started, the biggest one I sold, we had over 500 team members, and I spent the majority of my time developing the 64 leaders inside the business. That was my job, and it's been pretty cool. And that was almost 10 years ago. It's been cool watching them go get big jobs in other companies. It's so cool. And I thought you'd get a kick out of this. So about 6-7 years ago, my team gave me this coffee cup that says "Candid but Caring."
Oh yeah.
I don't know if it shows up. And you talk a lot about that. And I was intrigued by, the 4 pillars of a friction-free culture: care, candor, accountability, and responsibility. I'm trying to really get my head around the friction-free, because I think there's a lot of opportunity and struggle, all of that goes on. So there can be some healthy friction that goes on there. So talk about that. Yeah.
Yeah, of course, there's always going to be, we strive for friction-free, and I guess it aligns really with WD-40 because we actually reduce friction. But, those 4 pillars are really important. The care one is we love and care about our people enough, not only to reward them and applaud them for doing great work, but here's the rub. We're brave enough to redirect them, or not protecting our own comfort zone at the expense of their development. And that's where a lot of leadership falls down, because expectations or A's aren't clear. That redirection conversation becomes a very uncomfortable conversation, particularly for this person delivering it. So you probably choose not to have it. And, that's really, sad. Because we're not doing what we should do, which is helping that person win. The candor one I love. No lying, no faking, no hiding. I believe most people don't lie in businesses. I believe they fake and they hide. And the reason they fake and hide is because of fear. There's a very low psychological safety. I'm not going to step out on that limb because I'm afraid of the consequences. Accountability is, are we clear about what an A looks like? And then the responsibility one is really interesting. We created something, and you probably read it, called the Maniac Pledge. And our learning from that is you have to give people permission. This whole Maniac Pledge came about many years ago. I'd been traveling, out and around the world to some of our operations, and I guess I was out for nearly 2 weeks. And I got back to the office one day, and someone comes running up to me and couldn't wait to get into my ear and tell me how they were sort of angry about the fact that there was something they didn't know about. And I said, well, you know what you didn't know. Why didn't you go and find out? And I got this blah, 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 which was basically they were afraid because they didn't have permission. So I said, right, we got to write a permission statement that gives people the responsibility. And the Maniac Pledge, and I can read it to you, is I am responsible for taking action, asking questions, getting answers, and making decisions. I won't wait for someone to tell me. If I need to know, I am responsible for asking. I have no right to be offended I didn't get this sooner. And if I'm doing something others should know about, I am responsible for telling them. And I jokingly say now, this is the vaccination against a disease that runs in all companies. And I call it the na-na-ni-na-na disease, the finger-pointing disease. So this was very powerful because we gave people permission.
Well, if I worked for you and this was going on, I would feel like I really matter and I'm actually in the game. I can move the needle and make a difference. And so all of that has to drive so much more productive engagement. Productive to me is, creating the value you hired them to create, and they're like leaning in to fully do it. What are you noticing there around culture and just productive engagement across so many different, countries, diversity, employees, and all of that?
I don't really have the answer. I'm humbled by it, quite frankly. This is a kind of great idea initiative that could have also fallen flat, where people were just too busy or they didn't care enough. And I was shocked. I was shocked with the number of entries. I was shocked by this panel of judges we handpicked that I described. I mean, those people did themselves a service by doing such a good job, because now they're all on our radar and we see what leadership they brought to it. And then watching, maybe, I have 3 kids and maybe this is the mother in me, but watching these people present their ideas, I'm so proud of them. They all did really great. And there's also a whole bunch of ideas that were not in the final 3. So what we've committed to doing is going back to those ideas and reviewing them again. And it could be that some of them are really suitable for specific markets, even though they didn't make the cut on the best ideas for us to scale. So yeah, we've committed to doing that. And I think people appreciate that we're kind of giving them credit for the work that they've done. And it matters to us. We have quarterly business updates, like a lot of companies, where all our managers join, and we've talked about it in those sessions, and we've made these commitments out loud. So now we really have to honor them, right? So I think that probably helped, because one thing I noticed with the 3 winners is that the team was the presenting team, but their manager and their manager's manager was as excited as the team about winning this thing or being one of the top 3. And first of all, that's great to see. We've got managers that really care about the success of their part of the organization. But second, it just allowed all of us to see the supportive mentoring side of these people as managers. So yeah, all around, I could talk about it all day, but it's been really good. Of course, now is the hard part, right? We've got this far. Now we really have to do it, because if we don't, then this whole competition, we'll never be able to do it again, because it won't have any credibility. So we put in some framework and accountability already, and it will be incorporated into our budget, which our budget season starts in September. And yeah, the idea is we're going to do this at latest
at the beginning of 2026.
Yeah. Now, any one of these three could be another brand, another entire business line if it takes off, right?
Yeah.
What a
Yeah.
way to grow.
Absolutely. I mean, if you talk to global marketing, they would be like, wait. No new logos. Wait a minute. But definitely down the track, that's possible in any of these areas, or it could fit very nicely within one of our brands, which all of them did. And that's one of the reasons that they won, is that, the cost of entry wasn't prohibitive. It applied to enough businesses around the world, so it was scalable. It aligned with our strategy. And that was the other thing that kind of floored me, is that every year in the last couple of years, we've done a lot of work to articulate our priorities for the year. So we usually pick just sort of 5 or 6 things, and we try to articulate them very specifically for the year. But the other thing that happened this year is we started for the first time talking about a 5-year strategy. It's just not how we've thought before. We've always thought about the next year or two. And so we've started to talk about the elements of our 5-year strategy and what's important within that. And I didn't know how this happened. Well, I kind of have an idea, but these teams, they very clearly aligned their projects to the elements of that strategy. And I think what happened is, and I didn't know this was happening, is those managers who had access to our global business updates, they would take the information and really effectively cascade it, which we do ask them to do, but they cascaded it very well, because I was listening to these presentations thinking, how the heck do these people know all this? But it was good because their ideas fit.
I want to shift now to, what you did to contribute. And in so many ways, I think even got the party started to save 15,000 lives out of Afghanistan. And there were 5 different, if I understand it right, 5 different evacuation broader missions that came up. And the first one was saving a young woman over there, Aria. Can you explain how that got started? Because that, pretty much brought me to tears listening to you talk about that in a couple of your interviews.
So what led me to want to go over there is it was when I was working in Afghanistan on a classified program, there was this one guy I hired, and he was a 19, 20-year-old Afghan guy working as a interpreter for us. Started out as an interpreter, but then became so much more. He was so smart. He was so good. And in Afghanistan, it's like everybody's their cousin, right? So he had a cousin in ministries. He had cousins here, cousins there. So anytime we wanted something, he was the go-to guy. And this young man's name was Aziz. So Aziz and I, we got into some hairy situations where, we made it out, which is great, but whatever. And I had always told Aziz that I would come get him and his family. I left working with Aziz in 2007 timeframe. And I went on to another contract and did some other stuff in Afghanistan. But I always tried to stay in touch with Aziz. Here comes 2015. He wants to get his SIV, Special Immigrant Visa, for the work he did with the U.S. Forces. So I help him submit that. Well, our administration was so screwed up on that by promising people in another country that helped us in war, but then not coming through with their promise to help them. Here comes 2021, and Stevie Wonder could see what was happening in Afghanistan as the whole country started collapsing, and the American administrations were basically getting ready to turn their back on it. And as veterans, we saw that like, oh man. Aziz and other veterans had guys like Aziz as well. These guys fought with me. They saved my life. Commandos fought with me, et cetera, et cetera. I've got to go save Aziz. I made a promise to this guy and his wife and his kids. I'm not going to break that promise. I'm not going to turn my back on a brother. So spring of 2021, I come up with this idea. I'm going to go get him. And I had 3 ideas. 3 courses of action, as we call them, right? Course of action 1 was my company is just going to open up an office in Abu Dhabi or in Dubai and send Aziz over as a business manager, with his family and he can run the company. I don't care what he did. He could have sold falafels. I could care less. Just open up a business, put him there as manager, and he's safe. And they get a 5-year business visa. His family's there. He just would have to make enough money in that business to provide for himself. And he already did that for us at one point in time, worked in Abu Dhabi, or Dubai, excuse me. The second course of action was I hit up a buddy of mine. I actually asked this individual, can you get me a cameraman? And I was going to go over and film the fall of Kabul. And Aziz, with his cousin network, was going to get me in to see President Ghani, all the ministers, and we would interview them as the nation was collapsing. I really should have done that because that would have been an amazing freaking documentary. But and then we would have taken Aziz and his family to, again, Dubai, to the movie city they have all over there to help for the editing and get them out of Afghanistan. Safe. Not a big threat. The third one was I call up some guys from my background and military background, asked them if they would go help Aziz get him out of the country. And I did ask some guys, and they're like, do I get to kill Taliban? I'm like, yeah. They're like, oh, I'm there, bro. I'm there, man. I'm like, oh, I'll pay you. They're like, I don't want any money. If I get a chance to kill more Taliban, I'm good. So cool. And that was, I was going to go on over to Sharjah, UAE, lease a Russian plane, buy some guns. One can buy guns anywhere. And then fly in Afghanistan, forcibly get Aziz and his family onto the plane, take off over a neighboring country, throw all the guns out, declare an in-flight emergency, and then land somewhere and get arrested. At least we're out of Afghanistan. And I've got my lawyer and his international law firm that he's part of, we're going to work on getting us released at that point. But still, we're out of Afghanistan. Don't worry about it. I was all good with that. Those are my 3 options. So I'm going to do this. I called the guys that used to work for me on that classified contract and asked them if they wanted to participate. Not thinking any of them would, because it was my stupid idea to do this. One of them was finishing medical school. One of them was running a family business. And one of the guys, a UFC fighter, and he's on Fox News. And he's like, oh, I've got these talks and I got this other stuff I got to do. But if you make it to UAE, I'll fly over and, we'll have steak and beer and that'll be cool. I'm like, yeah, cool, whatever. I got a call from another Marine that used to work for me. And he says, how would you like to save 3,000 to 5,000 orphans? And I'm like, who do I have to kill to save these orphans, right? He says, hopefully no one. I'm like, oh, thank you. You get tired of hurting people, and I didn't want to do that in my life. So I'm like, what do we do? He goes, well, I got the ambassador from the UAE, and we sent him a request to borrow some planes to get the orphans out. We just need a politician to speak to the ambassador, U.S. politician, to speak to the ambassador. And, our old boss, my old team leader, who was our program manager for a classified program, he said to call you. I'm like, well, I know someone who knows some politicians. So I call up one of the guys that worked for me before, the UFC guy who couldn't go. And I said, can you get me a politician? This is what's happening. He goes, yeah. And he asked if he can be on the conference call. Come to find out, long story short on that, it wasn't the ambassador. It was the ambassador's assistant. And he kind of chuckled after the U.S. politicians stepped on each other's heads to bow and kowtow to this guy. And the guy kind of laughs and goes, I'll let the ambassador know. Thank you. Fucking hangs up, right? I'm like, oh, okay. I turned to my business associate and a brother of mine from a veteran motorcycle club we were in. And he says, you do know that my family is best friends with the royal family of the UAE, right? He said, I played polo with the Crown Prince. My dad, my friend's dad, and the king were best friends. I'm like, what? He goes, and I went to Georgetown University with the ambassador from the UAE. Do you want me to call them? I'm like, yeah. So he makes the call. The ambassador says, let me call the Crown Prince. This is August 13th, August 12th or 13th. He calls the ambassador. The ambassador calls the Crown Prince. The Crown Prince says, whatever Joseph Robert III wants, we will do. So Joe turns to me, he goes, well, we're in. I'm like, oh my gosh. So we bought plane tickets, the two of us, and we head to the UAE. Now, this huge groundswell of as Afghanistan fell, as Kabul fell, veteran organizations, other people, a ton of veterans, 20-year war. There's a lot of veterans who work with Afghans, Christian groups, etc. They start putting together lists of Afghans to evacuate. And it all went into this one hotel, the Willard Hotel in D.C. A lot of these organizations set up in a conference room, and they get all these requests, put it all together, raise money from sponsors or what have you, donors. And then they were trying to charter planes or send me the list. I hit UAE. We're up in Dubai on August 16th is when we arrived, and Kabul fell on the 15th. My interpreter Aziz, I'm talking to him, trying to get him into the airport, trying to get it taken care of. He can't make it in. It's a complete cluster. State Department didn't know what they were doing. The military was hobnailed. They were hobbled. They didn't know. Their authority was very limited in this evacuation. The Taliban were given security around the entire airport, which is wrong. And then the U.S. State Department gave a list of all the SIV applicants, the Afghans that worked with the Americans, to the Taliban and said, here you go. The people that you were hunting, they're trying to kill, can you let them in? Here's a list of everybody. And the Taliban's like, oh, that's awesome.
Who made that decision?
I don't know, but it was Mr. Blinken's, Secretary Blinken's chair, right? So he was the guy in charge. It could have been an underling. It could have been Blinken. I don't know. But it was a damn stupid thought process. A lot of people were killed. Well, we're in Dubai, and again, I'm getting all this information, all these names, save this person. We're putting on the list. I'm like, as soon as I get there, we'll see what aircraft we have, how we can start evacuating people. The military, U.S. military, was still taking the airport back from the Taliban and, trying to clear it. And everybody saw the pictures of the Afghans getting on military planes and falling from the sky. And so the military had to go in, ground forces, and again, clear and secure the airfield. So that happens. I'm in Dubai, and I get this text message, a WhatsApp text message. And the picture is a young girl walking down the street. The Taliban are taking the picture from a car, and they say, we know who you are. We're going to rape you, and we're going to kill you. And it infuriated me, Lee. I mean, if I could have flown right into Afghanistan at that moment, I would have hunted those guys down who did that for threatening a young lady. I was really just pissed. I can't get into Afghanistan. I'm still in Dubai. I got to get to Abu Dhabi, which is another state in the UAE, another kingdom. So I'm on the phone. I go, give me this girl's number. I contact her, and we start chatting and texting. I'm having her send me pictures, and she thinks I'm a complete freak or a creeper. So I'm like, I need you to take a picture of yourself, a selfie, with you touching your left ear with your right hand. And she goes, what's wrong with you? You're weird. I'm like, no, just do that for me. And she would stick her tongue out or give me the finger or something like that. And she goes, you're weird. I'm like, no, because I didn't want to be talking to a Taliban guy who's pretending to be a girl and then send someone in to go get her. And then, 3 days. I promised her that I would get her out. 3 days and then 3 nights. And on the third night, and she was all by herself. She had no food, no water for 3 days. She did find, forgive me, Aria, a bottle of vodka, and she was slowly sipping that. But there was no running water at the airport. There was no food at the airport. She was hiding under her desk and hiding where she could because the Taliban was searching for her. On the third night, I get a phone call. Pick up the phone. It's a Afghan landline number. I answer it. It's her. She says, they found me. Someone told them where I am. You promised me you would save my life. You need to come get me. Man, I felt like such a complete waste because I wasn't even there. I had been talking to some U.S. Air Force Special Operations guys who were there on the ground, texting with them. So when she told me that, I had her drop a pin with her WhatsApp and stay where you are. And I called these guys and I said, you got to go get her. And they heroically went over outside of the area they were supposed to stay in. And they went to rescue this girl. And they're texting me back and they're like, she's not here. We can't find her. She's not here. And I asked them to just please keep looking. And if you find her body, bring it back to the mill side so that when I fly in, I'll be able to take care of her. Because there was an unbelievable connection that we had. One of the guys looks out a window. He sees the Taliban physically dragging this young lady away. So all of them go out the window. They have a discussion with the Taliban. They hand the girl over. And afterwards, I'm pacing like a dad, in a maternity ward back in the 50s, he ate two of my nails, wondering what the hell's happening. They text me back, and I get a picture of her flashing me a peace symbol in between these two special operations guys. And she texts me, she goes, I'm safe. I'm here. You did it. I love you. I love you. And I wrote, I love you too. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't mean it like that. Don't tell my wife I said I love you. But I did. I loved her. She was the first. And I broke down. I prayed. I called my wife. I told her what happened. And I said, that's it. I'm done hurting people. I just want to help people for the rest of my life.
What an amazing outcome for Arya. What was Arya doing in Afghanistan that made the Taliban target her?
Yeah. So Arya was an executive assistant at the presidential palace. She worked for the president, and she would do the hiring or the interviewing, whatever, for people coming to work in the palace. So she knew all those folks. She was also a strong advocate for women's rights, for children going to school, very vocal, and very against the Taliban. So because of that, she was a target. And they wanted to make an example of her.
Someone's asked me, of all your experiences as an entrepreneur and as a person, what's one of your biggest learnings? I would say the concept of patient ambition. If you have ambition without patience, you can run right off the cliff. You don't really think about the long-term effects of the things that you're doing. It's instant gratification. I want this now. I want my company to grow now. I want the value now. I want everything to happen now. But if you have patience and no ambition, you're waiting around forever and nothing's happening either. And so I learned this concept of patient ambition partially because when I was growing my company, one of my companies, I wanted to grow for growth's sake. I wanted it to happen now. It was, we had a $10 million company. I remember going to my partners and go, we're going to get this to 100 million in 5 years. Let's go. And by putting that time pressure on it and being so ambitious without really being patient and strategic, I made some drastic mistakes. I made myself and the company vulnerable. And one of those companies that I grew to over $55 million in global revenues, I lost after 15 years of growing it. So if you're listening to this, think about growing a business for 15 years. Blood, sweat, tears, not paying yourself for years, getting your business to finally be of value, and then losing it. Just because I didn't have the long-term game in mind. I didn't have that patient ambition of growing something over a longer period of time that was more foundational. And yeah, that's why I keep bringing up the message that, we overestimate sometimes what we can do in the short term. We underestimate, if you just have a little bit of patient ambition, what you can really build.
Yeah, initially, I think a lot of them that I get, because I love working with startups and everything in between, all the way up to really big public companies. they're making assumptions that they have no idea whether or not they're right. I see a lot of that. It's like your typical startup company hockey stick graph, or you're going into a new market, all these things. It looks great on our spreadsheet, but now we've got customers and people and everything else involved. And then I think there's really big limiting beliefs that we all have about what's possible in the future. And I think it's our job to keep pushing the boundaries of creating value to chip away or modify those limiting beliefs going in. I used to say it, John, and I've been saying this for a couple of decades now, I'm very patient with a strong sense of urgency.
Love it.
So like I'm super patient as long as everybody's doing the right work. If they're not doing the right work, then forget patience. Like we need to change something, right?
I love that approach. And I think a lot of times, maybe when you were saying what you were saying there, we go into ventures or we go into the new year or we go into this new product line or service with uninformed optimism. It's kind of like, oh, this is all going to work out perfectly. And I think on the other side, sometimes the financial analysts and us take the budget or the projections and, we divide it by 2 and multiply it by 50% because there's so many things that could happen and we're not sure what's going to happen, and so you get this dose of informed pessimism that turns to informed optimism ultimately. But we go through these cycles every time you start something new or looking to build something new. And so I love this concept of, having patient urgency, as you mentioned, because we also need to move. We need to achieve our 90-day rocks. Our companies work in 90-day segments. We've got to achieve the goals. So we have that. We also don't try and overshoot. And I think that's what a lot of entrepreneurs sometimes do. And they get disappointed when they don't achieve success in the first year or second year of what they're trying to do.
Yeah, when I go and I work with startups, and I took one over about 18 months ago that was a failed kids banking app, and changed the name. We call it Dinner Table now. We're building a community of families globally raising kids that create value in the world. And we have over 18 months, over 40,000 parents in our community. I think in 3 years, it'll be millions going in. But it's been interesting. There's about 120 investors, and there's all this pressure, tell us what projections are going to be for the next 3 years and all that. It's like, I literally can't give you anything meaningful until we get the foundation in place and we see what's getting traction and the return on how we're pouring gas on different things. Then I can give you a more meaningful projection into the future. But until that happens, we're building this foundation for growth. Now, you talk about that a little bit differently than I do, but I think it's the same thing. What's our foundational readiness for growth? And you're talking, I think it's organizational capacity, right, in your book?
Yeah, it's operational capacity, and it's also cash flow. How fast can your company afford to grow? And that was a big mistake, Lee, that I made. You talk a lot, in your book, the most important number. When you're trying to grow a business, one of the most important numbers at that particular phase, at least for your finance team, should be how fast can your company afford to grow based on the cash flow it's generating? And if you try and grow too quick, well, what ends up happening is if you try to grow 20%, but your cash flow is telling you can only grow 5%, where's that other 15% come from? Well, it comes from banks. It comes from investors. You start losing a little bit of control or equity in your business, or you're indebted to the bank and your balance sheet gets over levered. And so those aren't good ways to grow as well. So part of growing your business appropriately is you're growing with the cash flow that it's generating, right? Even to the story you're talking about, sometimes, we'd all love to have millions of users right now, but are we willing to spend X amount of dollars on marketing, or do we need to grow at a more steady pace so we build the foundation correctly? And I think that's something I spend a lot of time with entrepreneurs and businesses on is, getting the fuel for growth.
Yeah, in doing the research for this discussion today, I didn't realize that resale is growing at 3 times the rate that regular retail is. And I could see that really going forward. And then textiles, a very, very small percent is recycled. What's possible? Like, where could we get to as you see it? And your point is right on. All the materials here, it just gets moved around and used. There's a way to recycle it. Is it economical or not to do it? But what's the potential here?
So the potential's absolutely massive. I mean, the sort of volumes and the environmental harm, and really even more the loss of domestic economic value by the decisions that we all do make. We're all guilty of this, right? And that's part of that's part of what we're asking about re-engaging with your community on. So to give you a sense, today we collect about 6 billion pounds of materials. At Goodwill, we accept anything. It's part of our DNA and our culture. And we're best in class at finding value in those things that are no longer need, loved, or wanted. That's really, we're really good at that. And what we're finding is we're probably, we would say, gosh, we're a third of the donation market that's out there, but we're really single digits when you factor in the things that are thrown away. So we see a massive market opportunity with significant economic value. And before you recycle, or heaven forbid, before you dispose of them, we've actually found resale is the highest and best use. And so why is that? Why, if wouldn't I want to give away a backpack to a school or, do those kind of things? We actually see the economic value when someone in our stores, for example, is purchasing a very low cost item. That's meaningful for them. These are kids going back to school, low income families going back to school, making that purchase. They're actually giving something for it. That sort of transaction is a thing in and of itself because it creates maximal value for programs. And of course, we would appreciate that, but it actually extends the reuse of that item even longer versus just a traditional give it away donation. So the reuse is the highest aspect that's important. And then we look to recycle or repurpose those things, which there are many opportunities. What we found, though, is, speaking of sort of domestic renewal, we've got to rebuild our local infrastructures here in North America to be able to do something about those, though. Because again, it's sort of our hollow economy that we talk about. Again, we're buying everything from somewhere else, using it and throwing it away or giving it away and exporting it somewhere that we don't know about. And that's sort of in a lot of ways an issue too. Like there's something about finding value in our goods and in our local communities that we've also got to renew ourselves against. And I think that's why I genuinely believe donating that item, giving it to someone, whether it's Goodwill or someone else who are going to do good though. And Lee, there are for-profit thrift companies and donation companies. Note that value is not kept locally. That does not provide that economic benefit into those communities, right? So be really savvy about who you donate to. But those are all factors that we need to be considering.
Yeah, I love how this helps the local community. And that's a really big point that you're making there. And backing up a little bit around working with kids and even underserved community adults, what I observe a lot, and you've got a unique energy about you that it's the first time we've had a conversation, but I think naturally you show up in the right way. But usually when folks are addressing them, they're talking at or over them. They're not with their potential. And I think about being there, with their potential. And I get to work with I've worked with thousands of high schools, seniors, juniors around entrepreneurship and thinking about having a business and going through it. And every time I go to these sessions, there's lots of experts, leaders from companies of all sizes, and they talk at or over and the kids just fold back. I like grabbing a microphone and running out in the middle and just being with all that potential. And I think changing their, modifying their limiting beliefs. We all have limiting beliefs, but modifying them is maybe the biggest starting obstacle to get them going in the right direction. What do you think about that and approaches to modifying limiting beliefs? My guess is you show up amazingly that way. How do you train others to do it? What's your advice?
I mean, the days of standing behind a podium or, that elite panel, that it's mostly reading their bios versus actually sharing the wisdom. I mean, those are done, and in a lot of ways, I feel the same way you do, Lee. And the good news is most young people respond in kind. They're not going to have the attention span to sort of play out some long diatribe or some more ivory tower type deal that doesn't really connect with them and sort of what they're experiencing in day to day. So get away from those podiums and panels and get down into the floor and really understand the needs and what drives and motivates people. Because, at our core, and I believe this everywhere I've been, whether it's at Goodwill or whether it's been in federal agencies or even in the for-profit, like everyone deserves the opportunity to thrive in their own way, and you choose what you want to do. That's what's beautiful too, right? Maybe you don't want to achieve your maximal potential for whatever reason. And that's okay. No judgment, but for those who do, who want to run, those are the people that probably you and that we're at Goodwill looking for, because those are the people that can help. Those are the folks who aren't going to go back to prison. Those are the folks that are going to, put a firmer hand down and say no to making some, bad decisions in their life that may impact them down the road. And again, whether it's a young person looking for experience, whether it's a person who grew up with no family or no home and so had no guidance, there's just no judgment. Like we're kind of coming at this as humans all together in the same way. And I do want to know if there is anyone out there who's looking for assistance or is looking for help in a no judgment zone, that there's help for them. Like there's help. There's someone out there who believes in them. And try not to turn to things that can bring adverse behaviors. And again, we see it all the time, but just know there's help. And so your example of the way we talk and the way we communicate, if we're not with them, living with them, understanding their needs, you're not doing your job. And it kind of gets back to this thing with even corporate environments with big strategic plans that are going to sit on great shelves. You're not bringing your people along with that process. It's not going to do any good either, right?
So this focus group, if you will, a few attractions that said, "Hey, we have pain points." What were their biggest 1, 2, 3 pain points? I really wish this was different or better.
Yeah, I would say the first one was just data. We all talk about data all the time. It's this great tool. It's this great resource. You shouldn't make any big decisions without, consulting your data scientists. A lot of smaller attractions, a lot of smaller zoos, aquariums, they don't have data scientists on staff. And on top of that, the data coming out of their POS systems was not intuitive. So they couldn't make actionable decisions on it. They couldn't say, X makes Y. If we sell enough of this, we'll make more of this. There was no clear, intuitive way to look at their data and understand it for business intelligence. So that was really pain point number one. We need better data so we can make better decisions. Pain point 2 was they wanted a better ecosystem that just allowed them to handle this efficiently. They didn't have an interface that was intuitively designed. If they wanted a certain product change, they had to actually reach out to the company's support team. They couldn't do it themselves. And training/ongoing support was very limited. If there was a new feature, how do we get support on this? How do I train my team on this? And again, that was something we wanted to really address firsthand. And then lastly was just, I would say, ease of use in terms of bringing a segmented ecosystem into one. They didn't want to use a certain data reporting platform to understand the data. They didn't want to use another platform to understand the revenue. They wanted an ecosystem that allowed them to do it all with one. So we brought in data insights, business intelligence, customer intelligence, all your key POS functions, and then the ease of use piece all into the Pegasus ecosystem. So truly, your small team can do a lot more with a lot less.
So it saves a lot of time. Does it also save money as well, actual dollars?
Absolutely. The goal is, of course, to save actual dollars, and that is part of our transparent pricing model. So we're cutting out the need for hardware. With Pegasus ticketing, you don't have to buy a massive hardware system, scanners, guns, all that kind of stuff. You can just use the cell phone app via the Pegasus ticketing portal and scan in your customers at your zoo. If you have, hardware that you want to use, of course, we integrate, but we wanted to make barrier to entry extremely low. Number 2, there's no subscriptions. So with Pegasus ticketing, it's not a subscription-based ecosystem. You're not getting billed every month. It is purely a fee per transaction. So we don't make money unless you do. And then lastly, there's no percentage fees in here. We didn't want to take, a client that has a big offering and make a massive percentage on that offering that ultimately leads customers to feeling like, man, I'm getting gouged for this ticket. It was $200 and now it's $250. Pegasus, it is $1.52 each time a transaction is processed. That simple, with no other fees included in our ecosystem.
Yeah, for me, if it saves a lot of time, that is no small thing. I remember one of my aerospace companies, we built an internal platform, had a team working on it actually for a couple of decades, and the team kept growing. But in 1 year alone, just having that platform and being able to safely do things in less time, we saved 200,000 hours in 1 year. And so that was basically 100 fewer people we had to hire as we kept growing. And that was a big deal. It was more money for bonuses for everybody, more money for investments so we could grow faster, like all of it. So I wonder what that ROI would be as you look at your data. Yeah, you're currently spending X, you're going to cut that by 40%, 80% or something like that. And then they can do other higher value things. You're not actually saving dollars because you're still paying these people, but they can do other things to create more value for the customers coming through. Have you looked at that in terms of the time, the uncovering of capacity?
We haven't had any first, party data, any clients yet that we can really test that theory on. But what we can say from experience working with these clients, working with these attractions these are small teams. These are highly motivated small teams that really care about their industry, their business, their mission, their culture, what they're focused on as a small attraction. It's integral to who they are and what the clients that they're servicing like. What Pegasus ticketing allows them to do is spend less time behind the scenes. We don't want you spending 2 hours trying to set up a new product sale or adjust your inventory. We've taken great care to put people first in this ecosystem. Everything's intuitive. All of our checkouts, all of our customer adjustments, refunding tickets, adding new inventory are simplistic. All of it comes with training, video assistance, customer support, in-person integration to, again, allow this to not be a headache. You should not be spending a lot of time in your POS system besides checking your results and taking out that intelligence piece. And you should not be spending a lot of time having your team trying to figure out, how do I handle a basic business, interaction on the system. So firsthand data, we don't have that yet. But in terms of saving time, the whole system is designed to do exactly that.
Now, you did so many cool things. One that stood out to me was, hey, we're not going to hire anybody, with very few exceptions, that has 2 or more years of experience. And if they want to start, we're going to have them work for 1 to 2 weeks, open to close, get exposure to every part of the organization, service, washing cars, parking, whatever it is, with no guarantee of employment at the end, just to see who they are.
Yeah.
That is brilliant. And then I started going, well, I wonder what company that wouldn't work for. And I couldn't think of one. Like it's a strategy across the board. So talk about that and the why you did it, and what you noticed is some really cool epiphany wins from that strategy. Amazing, by the way. Yeah.
Well, thank you, man. That was another thing where we kind of looked at the fundamental truths that existed, especially in our industry, right? For the most part, people were always looking for people with experience, and everyone interviews great, right? Everyone that we hired always interviewed great. Now, there were people we didn't hire that didn't interview great, but everyone that we hired always interviewed great. No one shows up for the interview and says, hey, I actually, on the back end, I'm not very driven. I don't have a whole lot of motivation. And if you're not continually, whipping me, I'm not going to perform. Nobody says that in the interview. Right?
My preferred whip, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Nobody does that. And so I looked at it and said, okay, wait a minute. What if we did the opposite? What if we only hired people that didn't have experience in the car business, so that they would only know our way of doing things? They wouldn't necessarily have bad habits that they'd picked up for decades on decades working in other dealerships. So what if we only hired people that had very little to no experience? And what if we just hired them on character, not credentials? And then once we hire them, what if we put them through something that's truly going to show me their character? Because I don't know their character in a 20-minute interview. I know that they're giving me the polished version, but how do they act, react, perform when they're tired? How do they act, react, perform when they're frustrated? How do they act, react, perform when they're overworked and underappreciated? Right? Like, I want to know their true character. And the only way I could get that, to get their true characters, I had to put them, there's a reason the military puts these guys through boot camp. Like, they're trying to figure out who are my soldiers, right? Like, who's going to show up and who's not, who's weak and who's strong. You don't just go, I'm in the military, and then the next day they've got you out on missions that are, important to the survival of the United States of America. No. You got to go through the ringer first so we can figure out who you are. And so we created just a 2-week boot camp right there within the dealership. And that boot camp meant that you showed up at work at 8 in the morning and you went home around 8 or 9 at night, and you did it every day for 2 weeks with no day off. We were closed on Sunday, so I guess one day off there in the middle. And you had to work in all the different departments. We did one day in detail where you're washing cars and you're getting dirty and muddy. And if it's cold, it's cold. If it's hot, it's hot. And you got one day in service where you're dealing where, nobody ever wants to be in a service department. They're only there because they have a problem. That's the whole issue with the service department, right? And so through that whole process, we would start with, I would hire in groups of 10 to 14 people. And by the time I got to the end, I'd have 5 or 6 left. And those 5 or 6 that I had left, those were the good ones. They actually were the type of people that we were looking to be on a team with. We got to work with these people. So yeah, it just really worked, man. And it really just came from relooking at, what if we kind of do the opposite of what we've always done so that we can get a different result?
Yeah, and reflecting on over the years hiring thousands of employees just for my companies, I don't know anybody that could fake it for 2 weeks.
Right.
Like, can't. And I've always known that within the first week, if I have a superstar, I know within the first week.
Yeah.
If I don't know after 30 days, I have a solid middle performer, maybe, or worse than that, in there. So I love that. I'm going to incorporate that in a lot of things that I'm doing wherever I possibly can.
That's awesome.
One other thing that I thought was interesting, and I've heard a number of different, number of times doing something to develop a habit. I believe you were like 67 days to make it easier to do it than not do it.
Correct.
How did that? So again, 66 days, it's way harder to do it or harder to do it than not do it. But then all of a sudden it flips. What did that look like at sort of scale inside of an organization and implementing those kinds of things and staying the course for 67 days to make it easier for the employees to do it than not do it?
Yeah, that was a really big part of our ability to go through this, Lee. Most businesses in my space operates in 30-day windows. Everything's a 30-day window. Financial statement comes out every 30 days. The manufacturer launches their new incentives and rebates every 30 days. Pay plans are set up. Everybody gets paid monthly. Like everything's a 30-day window, 30-day cycle. And what I find fascinating is 90% of car dealerships in this country with different tools, different technology, and different opportunities, 90% of the car dealerships in this country still sell the same amount of cars today that they sold 30 years ago. Right? And so it's like, okay, wait a minute. Things are changing. Well, why aren't the results changing at all? And I came to realize it's because they operate in 30-day windows. And you can't actually cement change in a 30-day window. So they all have this desire. They're like, oh, there's this new thing and here's what we're going to do and we're going to do it and it's going to be great, right? And they put it in place and then 30 days later, they get their financial statements and they don't look like they want them to look and they go, okay, we're not doing that anymore. All right, that didn't work. Let's try this. And they're constantly trying all of these things versus cementing the behaviors and habits and patterns that actually drive powerful results. There's a reason I noticed, and maybe more over in your space, you see it, but a lot of big corporations, they work in quarterly, everything's quarter, first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter. Well, a quarter is 90 days. That actually gives things time to stick, right? And so once you kind of know that it's going to take 2.5 months before something becomes easier to do than to not do as a leader, you make your decisions differently. If I'm going to roll something out knowing that it's going to take me 2.5 months of constant reminders, 2.5 months of accountability, 2.5 months of training, 2.5 months of every single day saying, hey, Lee, did you do it? Hey, Lee, did you do it? Hey, Lee, did you do it? If I know that, I might not roll something out because I don't want to put the energy or effort into it. Or I'm going to be certain that it is the thing we need to roll out because I need to put the energy and effort into it. So understanding the timeline and window that it takes to really create or implement change in your business, in your life, in an organization, in your family or whatever, helps you make that decision if it's whether or not it's something you really want to do. And then having the ability to stick to it is how you actually create growth and change and scale.
Yeah, the challenge from my view is that most CEOs won't have the discipline to keep it going. So there has to be a way to operationalize it. Like, this is what we do, and everybody needs to do what they say they're going to do. And I see the same thing in families as a challenge. Parents are saying, how come, kids, you're not doing what I asked you to do when I asked you to do it, and yet the parents aren't doing what they said they would do.
That's right.
Kids are smart. They pay attention. It's like, why should I have to do it in there? Business model. This is fascinating for me because when I go into a new organization to work with them or invest in them, buy them, whatever, I've got a number of different ways that I do it. Usually 100% of the time, or at least 99% of the time, all the leaders don't understand the business model. And so how do they make really good decisions around that? And even the CEOs explain your business model to me, and I get answers that don't make a lot of sense. And sometimes almost like I've just asked the question for the first time, the first time they heard the question. Why is that, do you think? And then what's key to make sure we get business model right? I have my thoughts around that, but what do you think?
Well, I think you have to understand what business you're in, clearly. And I think particularly today, it's expanding the vision of that model. Take airlines. They say they're in the business of flying people from here to there. Half of travelers start with an airline booking. But, if I'm the front door, why am I not selling hotel and car effectively? Why is Booking.com worth more than the top 4 airlines combined? Because they sell hotels, which are a whole lot more profitable than airline tickets. And airlines are getting, half the people coming to them, and they're doing a terrible job of selling other stuff. They could sell the whole trip. But they look at themselves as, we're about flying big silver birds around. We're the front door of travel. So I think you have to expand the vision, of what your company can be, from what it's always been. And, then you take tools that help you do that. So John Deere, for example, is their tractor is now a platform for the farm. And they're using AI with lasers to kill weeds, and they're telling you where you need more water, and they're connected to a weather company, and they're connected to a seed company, and they become a platform. And guess what? AI is a learning system. So it's going to learn your farm and make you more productive. And when it does that, are you going to go to Massey Ferguson? No, because they don't have the data. And that's what's so impactful about AI systems, is that they're learning systems. I think it's the most important thing about AI. And if your competitor has a learning system, Tesla has 10 billion miles of travel that they've digitized. How are you going to catch them? It's not going to be easy.
Yeah, and on the business model side of this, you talk about in the book, and I've heard you mention this in a number of podcasts, like own the assets and the edge of how customers are consuming it. And one of the business models, out there, you can be the largest hotel company in the world by controlling other people's assets, and we just make it easy and we create the platform for all that to happen. Not everyone can do that. So for small and mid-sized businesses, where others are trying to control the edge of how people buy by using their assets, how can they think about modifying or evolving their business model?
Well, that's tough for a smaller player. So in that case, you have to, I think, diversify the platforms where you distribute, and not get captive with just one. And particularly because they're changing, right? Because, SEO doesn't mean so much anymore now with AI here. So how can you look at, how do I distribute my products? How can the manufacturer help me, right? How can the distributor help me if I'm the retailer? How can other people who are bigger than I help me distribute my products? And then where am I going to do it? I live in a small town in the mountains of Nevada up in Lake Tahoe. And 10 years ago, the biggest insurance guy in town and I were talking, and he said, I know I have to get more into the internet. I know I have to get more into YouTube and social networks. What should I do? I said, hire a kid. said, you need to do this, but you don't know how. So actually he hired his own kids, and they went heavily into social media and got into 2 new lines of business in recreational sports insurance, because they found groups of people online that they could reach that they never would have reached from this little town in Nevada. So it's really about looking across the mosaic of opportunities and saying, where can I, as a small business, be most effective? And let's not just get locked into one method of distribution.
Yeah, I love that. That's great advice. One question that came up getting ready for this interview was your ability to shift gears quickly. Because I get asked the question, how do you keep so many things going at once, all these different companies? I'm currently CEO too, and I've just got a ton of stuff going. And I can see all of them, whether they're on track, at risk, or behind. I can keep track of it all the way through. And I've gotten to a place where I can just shift gears almost instantly. And then I look at LinkedIn, you've got 42 professional experiences. You're involved in so many different things. Do you intentionally think about that? Because you have to have that ability.
No, I guess I don't think about it. I think what's happened is, after I left Kayak, my business was basically as a board member, and I've served on boards of 20 companies now, both public and private, and a speaker and an author. And being a speaker, you get to see so many different industries. And I do research about so many different industries. And upcoming speech, I dive deep into what that industry is about. I learn more about it. And what's cool is you can always apply the lessons from that industry to the next industry. And in fact, if I'm trying to convince somebody in the oil industry that here's some technology how to use, I'm not going to talk about the oil industry because they're not going to believe it. I'm not believable in the oil industry. Excuse me. But I'll talk about, what happened in agriculture or manufacturing or somewhere else. And you get them to connect the dots. And, I could do that, right? Rather than telling them what to do, you kind of attract them with what to do. So I enjoy the diversity of thought, and, helping a bunch of different companies. I'm on the board of 2 cybersecurity companies, and, an AI company, and it just all gets wrapped up together. I think you have to thematically think about what is applicable from one industry to another, and how can I use my knowledge to help this industry with the idea from this other industry.